I'll be talking about synaesthesia. I'll start with that. And that means necessarily talking about colors and talking about music to some extent. So colors actually came up in the very first scientific report on synaesthesia that we know of by a German doctor, Georg Sachs, in 1812, where he talks about having colored ideas. And he already noticed that it's particularly things which form a series, a sequence, like numbers, days of the week or months, the letters of the alphabet, but also elements in the music like intervals of the musical scale that take a color. And these colors appears in the mind of the person whenever any one of these elements is seen or heard or maybe even just thought about. And these ideas happen spontaneously. They come to mind without any effort, without any planning or decision. And they might appear even in dark space as visible objects that takes a position in space. In fact, what we're looking at here is perhaps the most common form of synaesthesia. There is a minority of people, but still a significant minority, who, when they read or hear or think about the things like February, March, or September, or Friday or Tuesday, they have a feeling, a sensation that these concepts or ideas are actually out there in space, not necessarily like in this image around the body, could be all in front of you, and also they can take different colors. But I don't want to give you the impression that synaesthesia is only about colors. I will show you also other examples of combinations of several modalities. What happens is that a sensation, something that is one of our sensory modalities, is stimulated by a stimulus, an object that is actually out there, will produce the corresponding sensation like we all have. But in addition, there will be something extra that shouldn't be there because there is not a corresponding stimulus that would normally elicit that particular association. Okay, let's start with music and colors, and in particular with an individual, which I believe has a particular significance also for Ultima, who is Olivier Messiaen. And Messiaen is already known among musicians and musicologists for his use of songbirds, the songs of variety of birds into the music, and as a way also to structure, to take inspiration, to compose. This is sort of audible or visible in the music itself. But Messiaen is also very well known for his talking about color sensation that would be systematically linked to elements in music in his own composition, using the music, using the colors in the music as a way to compose it. In several autobiographical pieces and interviews, he is known to have said, for example, one of the greatest dramas of my life consists of my telling people that I see colors whenever I hear music, and they see nothing at all. That's terrible, and they don't even believe me. This summarizes very effectively the situation in which many synaesthetes live, that they feel frustrated, that they are alone in this world with this particular sensation. And even when they meet someone else who has similar sensation, they're not exactly quite the same. There is not a good correspondence and so on. So there is a loneliness attached to it. Anyway, Messiaen was able to capitalize on this talent, if you wish. So chronochromy, Turingalila symphony includes birds, includes colors, and so on. In other interviews, he makes clear that this particular ability has always been there since he was a child, and this is also very typical of synaesthetic individuals. They cannot recollect when it began. It's always been there. It comes from childhood. It seems to be inborn in the individual. And then he clarifies what, in particular, in the music generates the colors. chords are expressed in terms of colors. For me, for example, a yellowish orange with a reddish tinge. Okay, this is actually quite complicated to enter Messiaen's world of colors and sound, but I think it's worth spending some time on it. Here we see on the right a description taken from an interview, so it's himself describing his experience of shifting from one semitone up and semitone down, and describing how the colors would change and moving from octave to octave, and also how that would preserve the range of colors but change the intensity of them, a bit like in what happens in actual color space. And on the left side, we see here the input, the stimuli that were effective for Messiaen in producing colors. These are the modes, and next to it, the composition, some of the composition of Messiaen where these modes were prevalently used, and then the colors that he would actually report being connected to these modes and to this particular composition, and that we would also, as we will see, include in the score in the musical score for the benefit of the director and the musicians that would perform the music. So we can see here, for example, that in the third mode and in its first transposition, the one used, for example, in canyons and so on, there is a lot of orange, gold, milky white, and so on. Many of the colors of the palette of Messiaen have to do with colors of nature, in particular the colors of the sky, the clouds in the sky, and so on. If we shift to the fourth mode that he used extensively, we move into another range of colors. These violets, purple violets, mauve, carmine red, purplish blue, and so on. So the colors of twilight, the sky at twilight, and so on. This is him in front of his church. And so there are these musical structures that would generate a systematic, recurrent, unchanging range of colors for him. In his opera, it took him 8 years to compose it, Saint-François d'Assise, that we are hearing here. In this particular piece, the singer goes through names of colors, and the colors will be at the same time played by the orchestra. And in fact, in the score, you can see that here he has written ruby red and white and gold, or green, soft green expanse, and so on. So for him, it was important to communicate this to everyone. And indeed, he seemed to have had the belief that despite his initial remark of the frustration of being alone and not being understood about these hearing colors, he had a conviction that one could convey this to the listening public with some training, with some attention, refining of attention. Eventually, others, like not only directors but also the listeners, would have agreed with him. Unfortunately, that's unlikely to happen, because if we look at other systems like Scriabin had also a systematic way of associating colors to sound. In his case, it looks like applying the colors of the rainbow in the same order of the rainbow on the keyboard, and he wanted also to communicate this to the audience. And in fact, in this particular composition, Prométhée, there should be, in addition to the musician, also an individual playing a light organ, tastiera per luce, in synchronous with the music. Now, it remains unclear if Scriabin was really a synesthete or not. After all, in all the arts, there is always this attempt to combine things, and it looks a bit too systematic to appear convincing as synesthesia. But this is perhaps an exception in classical music. If you think about rock concert, it's actually the rule to show color light during a performance, not the exception. So the problem is that we could actually disagree with a particular association and generate in other people, other synaesthetes or people who have learned a particular system of association. When we change composer, when we change system, what we call the Stroop effect. So which is a mismatch between the idea and the actual presentation of the color itself. So this is what's been called this effect in psychology. It's not only musicians that have this ability. In fact, the majority of people who have synesthesia are not musicians. But some of them are very famous, very well known, and they, again, like Messiaen, made quite a show of their own inner subjective experiences. So this is a painting by Kandinsky entitled Composition. And the name itself, he used often titles like compositions, improvisation, fugue. So to him, these images would have a sound and generate a sound, and vice versa. A description of him listening to Wagner looks very much like a description of this painting, which is lines and forms of different colors moving around, being dynamic and occupying space. But I want to focus a little bit on one particular form of synesthesia, which is very prevalent. It's the second most prevalent. And it's the fact that individuals, while they are reading text, the text is usually written in black on white. They see the black, they're not hallucinating, they know very well what is the color of the object out there. But at the same time, they have the sensation that there is another color on the same letter. They could be, for example, red, instead of just black. So one well-known person who talked a bit about this in his autobiographical book, What Do You Care What Other People Think? He's a famous physicist, scientist. He won the Nobel Prize in 1965 on quantistic electrodynamics. His name is Richard Feynman. He's known for many other things. He was one of the members of the Manhattan Project. And he writes a couple of pages on his synesthesia. And he writes in particular, when I see equations, I see letters in colors. I don't know why. And if you pay attention to the language that Feynman is using, he's not saying I think about colors. He's saying I see colors. He's using the language of perception. And this is, again, typical of synesthetes. They report to us that they are actually experiencing perceptually what they are mentioning, in this case, colors. So this is how an equation, this is Schrödinger's wave equation, one of the most beautiful equations of all times, that was at the basis of Feynman's own work. This is how it might have looked to him when written on paper. I came to study synesthesia about 15 years ago when I was in Tromsø, and the first two synesthetes I met were two women, both of them musicians, but they didn't have, interestingly, any type of synesthetic experience linked to sound or music. Instead, they both reported that when they saw letters of the alphabet or digits, each one was colored in a specific way. So the first thing I did is to ask them to take the computer, Microsoft Word, and color each one of these elements so that I can see them too and compare the two. So this is what happened. Now, you would notice immediately that the first synesthete and the second synesthete don't have the same color. Occasionally they do. So the A and the A are both reds, or the S and the S are both yellow. But you have also opposite colors, like the R is green here and red here, and everything seems completely random and accidental. Also, they don't always use basic colors or primary colors. Only at the beginning, these synesthetes have A, and then B, and then C, and then something that looks yellow. So the first four could be the primary colors, but after that is entirely unpredictable what colors will be attached to a particular letter, and so on. So these are very systematic. I asked both of them to do exactly the same 1 year later, suddenly, without warning and so on. And they reproduce nearly the same colors, correlations in all parameters of color like hue, saturation, and luminance were extremely high, close to 1, yeah, as a matter of fact, 0.99, something like that. Other well-known person who had this type of synesthesia, apparently, if we base it on his own poetry, Arthur Rimbaud, who is represented here next to Paul Verlaine, is known among many beautiful sonnets for one particular sonnet, which is the Les Couleurs de Voyelles, okay? In which he goes, each line begins with a vowel and describes its colors and then association based on the colors and so on. A, E, or I, O, U, and so on. As some of you might know already, Rimbaud was very prolific as a poet until he was in his late 20s and then decided to stop writing poetry completely. And later on, when he was interviewed by a journalist, he actually confessed that this idea of colored letters was just made up. J'inventais les couleurs de voyelles. And this brings up a problem, an issue that as a psychologist I have to face. And it's the fact that everything we have talked so far is based on what people tell us, okay? On introspection, on a subjective report. And how do we know that this is actually happening? We have to find some independent way to verify that this is really the case. I don't feel that Feynman is pulling our legs or Messiaen was pulling our legs, but we don't really have any way to prove that they are actually telling us what was really happening in their head, as we have in this case. This is a general problem in philosophy and in psychology, how to verify that someone is actually meaning what he's saying. In some occasions, it's quite simple to verify. For example, when we talk about colors, if I say this flower is pink, well, if the flower is right in front of us, it's easy to verify that, because regardless of what is actually my experience of color or your experience of color, we've all learned to call pink this particular experience, and therefore we can communicate with one another without a problem, and we will go on for the rest of our lives without running into issues. If I take something a little bit more subjective, like I tell you, I happen to have a headache today. Now, you don't know, because you cannot feel my pain, fortunately. That's beyond our abilities. But you know what a headache is. Everyone has experienced it, so you can relate to that. You can look for some clues in how I speak, my facial expression, my movements, and be convinced, quite convinced that, yes, I'm telling the truth, I have a headache. But if you meet someone who tells you that this letter is A, which is black, and I can see that, but it's also red at the same time that I cannot see, now we are in trouble, and we don't know how to distinguish this situation. So my take is that one way to find out if someone is telling us the truth in this particular case, not in general, of course, is on the basis of brain research. So perhaps we can solve the puzzle by using contemporary new methods for investigating, in particular, brain activity or also behavior. So I'll start with a simple, I think, straightforward hypothesis. This is what the synesthetes are telling us. If synesthetic colors are like sensations, that's what they tell us. I'm seeing in this, okay? Then, if that is true, the same brain areas that process sensory information about color should be engaged when synesthetic colors are experienced. So in order to do that, all we need to know is where are colors represented in the brain. Unfortunately, we have a score of neuroscientists. One of them is sitting here and will be talking after me, who have been working on this particular problem and studying monkeys, but also studying humans by using functional MRI, which is a way to make visible changes in blood flow, or if you want brain activation in a human. while they are, for example, seeing colors. So I'll sort of talk very quickly about one seminal study that includes the next speaker on the brain's color center. So these are absolutely normal individuals. As far as I know, they probably don't have synesthesia or anything like that. They are looking at this pattern that we can call a Mondrian for obvious reason. And while this group of individuals is seeing that, we get sort of a picture of the activation in the brain which is related to this particular stimulus. Then we show in another condition the same stimulus, but now without hue, without the color. So luminance is the same, the shapes are the same in the same location, and we get another pattern of brain activity. And now we apply a quite logical procedure that is used a lot in contemporary brain imaging research, which we take the activation in the average brain related to this minus that related to this, and what lights up should be activity that is related only to color, because everything else, like in Galileo Galilei's experiment, has been kept constant all along. So that should be the only thing that is related to color. And this area that is small, but is quite specific, lights up, and it has many names. V4 is one of the names used in the literature. It has been identified as the brain's color center. So now we know that when these areas is on, it's very likely, perhaps guaranteed, that that individual is experiencing colors. We also know from patients that the damage in this particular area wipes out the conscious experience of colors in that person. So with my colleagues at the University of Bergen, we used functional MRI with a particular paradigm, which is, again, the Stroop effect, but in this case simplified, applied to synesthesia. So we know, because each synesthete has shown to us what are the correct colors for each letter of the alphabet, what color would be congruent, what would be a good match. So we can show these on screen one by one. But we can also play a trick and switch the colors, so that in alpha the trials, the synaesthetic participants in this case, as well as the controls, we don't expect these two conditions to make any difference to them, will see actually the wrong color with each letter. And the task is simple. There is one letter appearing on the screen. All participants are in the scanner, they see this, and they have to say each time the letter colors loud, okay? And the correct response would be red, and everyone responds red. Is a very easy task. Synesthetes have no problem in saying red in this case. But we know that one particular synesthete, for example, reported to us that the letter S is also yellow. So there should be simultaneously a color yellow generated in the head of the person. There is nothing in the pixels themselves that are on the screen that would suggest the presence of yellow. So that means that now we can imagine a situation in which the color centers of the brain are in some kind of double representation of two colors that are coexisting, perhaps interfering to some extent with one another. So the idea is that if we consider all colors lie in a space. The space looks a three-dimensional space looks a bit like a sphere or so on. If we consider the distance between the, let's call it real color, the one that is in the pixels, and the illusory color, the one that is the synesthetic color, we compute the Euclidean distance between this, and now we use this parameter to find anything in the brain that is correlated to this particular parameter, trial by trial, in all of the synesthetes. Then we should be able to see whether that plays any role in the sensitive areas. And in fact, what we found, to our great pleasure, there is only one area in the brain here that correlates with this color distance between the real and the synesthetic color. And it's an area of the brain that, if you remember the previous images, in fact overlaps with what is known as the color center of the brain. So at this point, the majority of my students are convinced that the synesthetes are telling us the truth. because there is a corresponding state in the brain that we know is highly correlated with a conscious experience of colors, and that is showing up in the scans. But what I would like to talk also in the rest of this talk is the consequences of this, because one could say, okay, you have activity in the brain, but who knows if it's really, as the other colors, or who knows if it plays any role? Is it just extra qualia that is epiphenomenal and doesn't affect at all in any way behavior, actions, or other things? So what I would like you to see now is, in fact, many pieces of evidence indicating that it does matter, and this synesthetic ability actually is really an ability. It can be also a disadvantage at times, but very often is an ability. It is actually useful to have for solving cognitive problems. But the first example is a mixture of the two. And again, we are back to music now. This is a group in Zurich who studied one single individual, a musician, a viola or brush player, who had an unusual, very rare form of synesthesia. This time there are no colors. There is experience of taste in the mouth. So what this musician reported is every time she hears or plays an interval, like a minor second, or some of them are repeated, like the major third is wheat, the minor sixth and the major sixth are cream, a low-fat cream. So you can imagine this person, listening to a piece of music that contains a lot of these intervals, Mozart perhaps, and having an experience of having a cheesecake, bringing a different perspective to the notorious sentence by Steven Pinker of music like cognitive cheesecake. But what they played here is this Stroop situation in which they were dropping small solutions on the lips and tongue of the musicians, and simultaneously playing an interval. And the task was for the musicians to tell what is the interval she was listening to. This is something a musician can do without a problem. But what happened is that the speed at which she could actually say the correct name of the interval was very much dependent on the taste that she had simultaneously in the mouth. So that when the taste did match, like for example, it was a major third and sugar was placed in her mouth, then she would be very fast in responding. This is the congruent condition. But when it was incongruent, so again the major third, but something salty or something very bitter was placed, then there would be a delay in the ability to name the interval, as if these two simultaneous experiences, although they are happening in different modalities, would interfere with one another. And of course, just still water made no difference. That's a no-taste condition. Another one, which is related to sound, is the perception of rhythm. So we have pulse in music, beats, and so on. We can have it also visually. We can present, like in the Morse signal, a light switching on and off with different duration and so on. And that gets coded as vision. We can also present exactly the same as a sound, something that sounds like a Morse signal. So for example, this is the SOS, right, that we see here. Or we can show this or play it. And when you look at the controls, we see something that has been observed many times. To match a visual rhythm with another, so in this case it's the same, in this case it's different. It's done one right after the other, so it's immediate memory kind of task. It's very easy to do with sound for us, but it's a bit difficult with vision. We can still do it, but it's difficult. But now look at the synesthetes. They have exactly the same type of stimulation, either sound only or vision only, but thinking that while they are seeing this, they are also hearing it in their own synesthetic ear. Indeed, this causes an advantage, an increase in the accuracy in which they can match just by vision, but really vision plus sound, the two. There are also influences in long-term memory, like in these long strings. Imagine you have to memorize a long list of telephone numbers, okay? And this is an experiment done in Canada. So there are these lists of numbers that have to be memorized, they're studied, and then all the participants are immediately tested afterwards at this is time zero, immediate testing. There are two of them. One of them is the synaesthete, this one C, who have nearly perfect performance at time zero. But what's important here is what happens after 2 days when they are tested again. So they're asked to report back all these number strings. And now there is only one person that has still perfect performance, and that one is the synaesthete. Why? Well, again, there is this double coding redundancy. One of the synaesthetes you saw earlier, the first one I met actually, she told me that she used to work as a very young woman as a switch operator in this old telephone system where you had to put the cables in. And one of the parts of the job was to keep in mind a long string of numbers. And she said she was the best of all the people working in that particular job. For her, it was very easy to remember a long string of digits because it wasn't just a string of digits, but it was also a sequence of colors, like a color pattern. And the two combined together gives some extra advantage, a redundancy advantage. A famous neuropsychologist from Russia, Luria, wrote a delightful little book about Synaesthesia, a well-known mnemonist in Russia. This predates the similar books written by Olivier Sacks, who just died, who in a way imitated this style of Luria. And what both the mnemonist and the neuropsychologist concluded is that this incredible ability to remember everything that this mnemonist had was very much caused by the fact that Synaesthesia, the mnemonist, had synesthesia experiences all over the world, all kind of synesthetic experiences simultaneously. So sounds and shapes and tastes in the mouth and dynamic movements, vibrations, you name it. And because the combination of these was extremely high and would change all the time, it was able actually to code, not just color code, but code also by position, shape, and other modalities, every single element of what you would experience. I was one of the first actually to document another extraordinary ability of synesthetes, and that's the one in visual attention to find very efficiently an object that differs from other objects. If I ask you to find the number 2 here, it's not easy. It's right there, right? It's difficult because it's identical to the other distractors, it's just a mirror image and so on. But imagine that you have synesthetic vision and you could see all these files and the 2 with its own synesthetic color. Then it would look like this. And there you can see that the target pops out for us immediately. And indeed, the synesthetes showed very efficient searchers, much faster and very similar to the pop-out type of response. And it's not necessary to envision us that they would actually see the whole display in color. Just seeing part of it, perhaps where the focus of attention is at a certain point, where the fovea is at a certain moment, would be sufficient to make much faster this process of target identification. Now, if we consider that something happens to the eyes, and unfortunately there are some individuals who get damage to their eyes, the brain is not affected. They become blind nevertheless, despite the brain keeps alive and functioning, also in those areas that they don't receive the input any longer. And it's been reported that synesthetes actually, and this might not be surprising because these experiences are internally generated. In itself, they don't need visual input to exist. They continue to experience colors even after they have become blind, okay? And this might be the only visual experience that they are capable of reporting after blindness. One of these people is a celebrity, Stevie Wonder, and which appear in one of these conspiracy theorist that is not really blind, but anyway, is listed in Wikipedia among the people with synesthesia after Vincent van Gogh, Eddie Van Halen, Pharrell Williams. There is Stevie Wonder, sound to color synesthesia. Now, this is a bit puzzling to me because according to the story, Stevie Wonder lost his sight right after birth. So it's interesting to read here that the AI has color experiences. So I'm afraid this will remain a mystery for a long time. But there are cases that are very well documented of individuals who actually lost their eyes and had synesthesia to begin with. The type of synesthesia that Richard Feynman had, seeing letters and seeing colors. So this individual in Britain had to learn Braille. So it took him a couple of years to become proficient in Braille, so that he could read this word without a problem. That's Google, right? But what he experienced also that gradually over time, just like the letter G and O and other letters had a color originally when he could see, now in complete darkness, there would appear in this darkness dots of light corresponding to the Braille letters, and they would have the same color that the original letter had when the person had vision. Not only that, the most remarkable thing is that when they used functional MRI in this individual while the individual was reading Braille, okay, so again, this person is blind, it's in the scanner and is reading with his fingers, right? There is activation in one particular part of the brain, and again, it's according to the coordinates, the anatomical coordinates, it's corresponding to area V4 of the color center of the brain. So this is a wonderful example of brain plasticity. And indeed, brain plasticity here is a core, key concept, because the whole development of the brain and visual areas included takes time, and it has a particular course. For example, in the visual cortex, the number of synapses starts growing exponentially before birth and continues after birth. So this is just in the visual cortex. Connections, these are synapses, okay? How many links with other neurons neurons have. And they peak right before 1 year, they stay high, and then they start decreasing over time. You can easily imagine that this moment of great plasticity in the brain, if something is lacking or something is exaggerated in the experience of this baby, might have a lasting or strong impact on the very structure of the brain. Okay, so it turns out that to summarize, early visual experience acquired while the brain is relatively plastic and reflecting the vagaries of life events has a lasting impact upon neural structure. Let's think about grapheme color synesthesia. We are not born with knowledge of letters of the alphabet, right? It's something we have to learn. So the synesthetes need to learn that. It takes years to do that. But some of the way people learn, babies learn, is in fact using these color letters. These box that you see on the left is the actual box of one of the synesthetes that I've shown to you. So she gave it to me and I scanned it. And she was the one who had red for the A, green for the B, and C for the, and blue for the C. Then the three colors are repeated and repeated, like this is typical and so on. So after that, there is no more to hang on, and so some colors will be repeated or not. But these are clearly present in our experience. I call this particular account Toys R Us, literally so. There are other reports that are consistent with this, okay? What could be happening here is that because of the large amount of connectivity that you have at the beginning of life, some individuals, we don't know for what reasons exactly, might preserve some of these extra connections that are actually connecting areas of the brain that are specialized for different modalities, like for example for some aspects of vision that have to do with shape and other aspects of vision that have to do with color and so on. And because these are preserved, then they will continue also in adult life of having a crosstalk between these areas of the brain, so that one stimulus would be sufficient to generate an experience in the other modality. And in fact, a close colleague of mine, we shared an office for 3 years in Amsterdam, did a DTI. This is diffusion tension imaging. Is another type of neuroimaging. This type reveals the amount of connection, so it's about white matter connection between different parts of the brain. And by taking a quantitative measure of the amount of it, it turns out that groups of synesthetes have more connections than non-synesthetes, consistent with the idea that there is something of this hyperconnectivity that has been preserved over time. I want to conclude with another type of synesthesia that we all have. In fact, babies show it very early. A study of a group of developmental psychologists studying babies that are preverbal. It's important they are preverbal because here we see the embodiment of a metaphor that we all use every day, already existing in these infants. They are only 3 to 4 months of age. They're looking at a large screen, and there is a video camera which is filming their eyes, so that one can afterwards compute exactly how long they look at what is happening on the screen. This is the preferential looking paradigm in psychology. So in one condition, there is a ball, and then the ball starts moving, can move up or down on the screen. And at the same time, there is a tone. The tone is varying in pitch, and the tone can go high or can go down. Now, I'm already using synaesthetic speech, because pitch doesn't go up and doesn't go down. If you play the piano, it goes right and left, as a matter of fact. So, but you see, let's see, this is the condition, the first one, in which the ball goes up and the tone goes up. The babies really like this one, and they look at it until it's over. But now, if we play, and we change the order and so on, this is well done science. Now the ball in another condition goes down, but the tone goes up. This is not good. The babies lose interest right away and look somewhere else. Okay? So there is something here already existing that is showing that there is a correct match and incorrect match between two very different modalities. Sound and motion in this case. In another conditions, babies saw this shape transforming. I'm going to show it to you now. There is this one changing into this, or this one changing into that. Okay? Let's see it again. And at the same time, each shape was shown individually. At the same time, the same tone going up or up here or down would play. And it was when the smooth shape morphed into the sharp shaped that the tones going up worked the best. So the babies show the most interest. These kind of cross-modal interactions actually it's impressive that they exist so early, but they exist for the rest of our life. Because this is a study made in Oxford. In this case, it's about taste. So participants had to do something that looks maybe absurd at the start, which is to rate whether still water versus sparkling water is more like this or that. Okay? But everyone can do it, and everyone finds absolutely normal. and spontaneous to do that. So it's clear that still water is more like this, and sparkling water is more like that. Mm-hmm. And we can even give names to these shapes. So if I have to ask you, one of these shapes we are going to call Maluma, and another of these shapes we are going to call Takete. So which one is Maluma and which one is Takete? So, so this experiment has been done all over the world now, and it doesn't matter which language you speak, how you write it, if you hear it, if you read it, it doesn't matter. Everyone agrees that this is Takete and this is Maluma. Mm-hmm. So it works in Japan also. And so we can use this, we can use the sounds, we can use the words and decide whether brie is more, this is cheese, right? Whether brie is more Maluma than Takete, and everyone agrees that brie is definitely a Maluma cheese, right? Whereas cranberry juice is a Takete cheese. So now we are in the condition in which actually brie, the name is not, there is this plosive and alveolar trill. It's the wrong name for the cheese. It shouldn't be called brie, right? The reason is that it originates from a region of France that is called brie, so there was no choice. It worked better in Italy with gorgonzola because it's from a town called Gorgonzola, but the sound, this gr and z sound, the fricatives, they work very well with the sharpness of the cheese, I believe, for everyone. So what is going on here? Well, what is going on, I think, is something that 2,500 years ago Aristotle had already, in a way, put his finger on. In a wonderful little book by Aristotle, this is his supervisor, PhD supervisor, Plato, in a little book entitled On Sense and the Sensible, written just a few years ago, he writes, as black is a privation of white in the translucent, so bitter is a privation of sweet in the moist. This explains why the ash of all burnt things is bitter. So in Aristotle's minds, you have a variable which is light, translucent, and on one end you have the absence of it, and on the other end you have the presence of it, and everything in between is a change in intensity. So you have one variable. Now you need to align it to something else. Let's try to align it, as he said, to bitter and sweet. In this case, sweet is what is salient. It's what is what has primacy for us. Our survival depends on it, on identifying glucose in the food. Therefore, if our mind has to align bitter's witness to dark and light, it will do it in a very systematic way. Bitter has to be dark and sweet has to be white. This is amazing, given that white sugar appeared only about 250 years ago, and so on. He didn't know it, but ashes, yes, and other black things, dark things, usually taste bitter. So this is what I call Aristotelic coordinates that describe much of this spontaneous synaesthesia that we live all of our life. These are responses of hundreds of individuals collected by Laurence Marx in the United States, where they have to match a light, the intensity of a light, so brightness, to the sound of the vowels. And I'll say the vowels in Italian because that sounds a bit more closer, I think, to the pitch, actually, in which each vowel is pronounced, is U, O, A, E, I. So you hear the pitch going up, while I say the vowels. And this is very systematic. You see a fabulous correlation between the frequency of pitch and the perceived brightness and so on, right? Now, again, if we think back at the ball that is going up, a ball, in order to go up, has to defy gravity. So it needs force, it needs energy, it needs strength. It's something salient, something primary, something to definitely to mark as special. So more should go with more, higher should go with higher, and lower should go with lower. So whenever in these Aristotelic coordinates we want to find a match between two variables, we have to align them in the correct way, and there might be just one correct way. So if we are using all across the board force, activity, effort, intensity, primacy, or other, also pleasure as the marked end of the variable, then you know, an object that is going up would be at this end of the spectrum, and therefore it might get matched with high intensity of light or high intensity of pitch. Also, this is somewhat, in this particular case, this sequence of pitch is also embodied, because when we produce these sounds, the sound also changes position within our body. Again, that might not explain why these preverbal infants show such a neat preference for a particular match, to the point that makes us think that perhaps this is inborn. This is something that is already there, wired, so as to help us to go through our environment, which after all, you know, our body is the same, and the external environment is also constant usually, so that we will be well prepared from the very start, from the very beginning. Thank you very much.